Last week, Texas Governor Greg Abbott pardoned Daniel Perry, somebody who's a convicted murderer. It's the latest in a long string of extremely worrying developments about law and order in the state of Texas. Particularly, what's really worrying about this case is the nature of how law in the state is being used or not used to support the political ambitions of people like Greg Abbott, the intentions of the Republican Party. Watching our constitutional rights, like the right to bear arms, seem to only guarantee certain Texans have those rights, and a continued concentration of power in the hands of the governor of Texas. And now, what we've seen with this pardon of Daniel Perry, frankly, an implicit endorsement of violence against our fellow Texans. This is no small thing. But before we get into all this, let's take a second and take ourselves back to that time. July 2020, in Austin, Texas, much like the rest of the country, Americans are taking to the streets and demanding that justice be done and that the brutality by the police against our brothers and sisters end, and demanding change. While this is ongoing, U.S. Army Sergeant Daniel Perry was driving for Uber when he drove into a Black Lives Matter protest near the Capitol. First, he honked his horn at this group of protesters and then drove his vehicle into the protesters. This is not just hearsay, right? This is according to the report from the Austin police. And I really want people to remember what the context of this moment was like, what this country was going through at this time, because there is an eerie similarity here between what happened in 2020 and something that happened in 2017, where in Charlottesville, Virginia, a young thug named James Alex Fields Jr. drove his vehicle into a group of protesters in Charlottesville, injuring 35 people, permanently injuring 8, and killing Heather Heyer. So when we talk about somebody driving their vehicle into protesters, this isn't just a kind of random complaint. This is something that has been a life and death threat to protesters. And we're seeing, again, as everybody knows, too, all of these attempts by Republicans to make it legal, to waive responsibility for people behind the wheel if they drive their vehicle into protesters. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, and you look at the Charlottesville thing, and I saw somebody comment I can't remember. The commentary was very minimizing of what happened in Charlottesville. You actually look at what happened.
Oh my God, it's
And
horrifying.
it is shocking that it only killed one person. Just barreling into a group of people with the effing car. And again, and this is in the context of Dakota Access Pipeline, North Dakota Republicans passing laws saying, if they're in the road, you can hit them. Like they're a threat to you. It's really fascism.
So as we see this, right, as this is the context of what's going on at the time. As this happens, as this vehicle plows into protesters, Garrett Foster, who was there illegally carrying a rifle, AK-47, which in Texas, by the way, is not only completely legal, in fact, de facto encouraged by our government as they continue to push stronger and stronger protections for people to carry all sorts of weapons in all kinds of circumstances. He died shortly after this because Daniel Perry took out a loaded revolver and fired 5 shots, killing Garrett Foster. Perry claimed that this was in self-defense, and importantly, maintained and told the police that he shot Foster, quote, before Foster aimed his weapon at him, right? This is a really critical detail because the right-wing spin machine from people like Tucker Carlson to Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, we just saw at the beginning of the show, have been trying to make this implication that the story went like this. A young man was driving his vehicle down the road. A group of people surrounded his vehicle and started, attacking him. And then somebody came up with a rifle and pointed at his face and he fired in self-defense. No, what happened was Daniel Perry, and we'll talk about his motivations in just a second. Daniel Perry drove his vehicle into a group of protesters. Somebody was there who was legally armed which is your right in the state of Texas, and something that you see in protest after protest for the right wing, or small groups of right wingers who will stand outside of these kind of protests trying to intimidate folks. And yet, somebody who's saying, hey, I want to make sure that the group of people I'm with are protected and safe, then somehow it becomes dangerous and malicious and all this kind of stuff. Very important, though, that the spin that we get from people like Carlson and Dan Patrick is not accurate. The case went to trial, and by a jury of his peers, Daniel Perry was found guilty of the murder of Garrett Foster. And in that trial, he had every opportunity to put forward the case that he was acting in self-defense. In fact, that's what him and his team of lawyers did. And this jury was not convinced that Daniel Perry was innocent, and in fact, actively went out searching for trouble. The right-wing press went absolutely bananas and wanted to utilize the story of Daniel Perry, who, by the way, we mentioned that he was a U.S. Army sergeant. Garrett Foster was also a member of the United States Air Force, right? But this person who the right wing likes was, the latest victim of an overzealous liberal conspiracy to basically silence law and order respecting Americans and Texans, when nothing could be further from the truth. But here's Tucker Carlson just shortly after Daniel Perry was convicted of murder.
So during the last outbreak of armed extremism, which of course was the BLM riots of 2020, a former Army sergeant called Daniel Perry was driving for Uber in Austin, Texas. He was an Uber driver. He's in his car, and a mob of rioters surround him in the middle of the street and begin hitting his car. One member of the mob was a man called Garrett Foster. Foster is a militant with a history of waving his rifle at people. He approached Perry's driver's side window with an AK-47. Then he raised the rifle, and when he did that, Perry shot and killed him in self-defense. The lead detective in the case and the Austin police concluded it was a justified shooting. If that's not a justified shooting, there's no such thing. But because Austin, Texas, the justice system is overseen by a Soros-funded DA, Perry was charged with murder for defending himself. And tonight, we are sad to tell you, this man, a military veteran driving an Uber car, was convicted of murder. And what does that mean? It means that in the state of Texas, if you have the wrong politics, you're not allowed to defend yourself. So this is a legal atrocity. It's so obviously unjust that tonight we extended an invitation to the sitting governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, to come on this show on Monday. And we wanted to ask if he was considering a pardon for Daniel Perry. But for some reason, Governor Greg Abbott's office told us he just can't make it and that we should talk to the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, instead. So that is Greg Abbott's position. There is no right of self-defense in Texas. We're going to keep trying to reach the governor of Texas, get his views on that, and the Attorney General for that matter.
And this was something that Tucker Carlson kind of maintained for a while, and over the past year has made Governor Greg Abbott somewhat of a target, saying that he's not doing anything on the border, all this kind of stuff. And the sad reality is that somebody like Greg Abbott completely was happy to acquiesce to somebody like Tucker Carlson on this issue. I want to note two things before we get back to the case. Notice how these right wingers always talk about Daniel Perry, right? They use the military photograph, all this kind of stuff. But the guy who, again, was a member of the United States Air Force, no military photograph or anything like that, right? He's a dangerous militant. And yet this person who we're about to establish some very unsavory things about, kind of working class hero, put in a dangerous and difficult situation.
Oh yeah, are we going to get to this unsavory stuff? Because I got a few examples here. Once you get going,
let's get to that in just 1 second, because I want to establish two quick things here that are very, very important about not just this particular case, but what's been going on in the state of Texas. Because here's the thing: in Texas, the governor does not just get to pardon people. The standard that we have in the state that recognizes the importance of a jury system here in Texas. Texas has strong juries. Because in Texas, we believe that justice is something that should be controlled and done by the people. Now, we do have a pardon system because mistakes are made, things like that. The pardon system goes through a board that makes recommendations to the governor about cases, and then the governor can pardon them after they have been recommended to them by this board. This board is supposed to be non-political, non-partisan, and like many other boards in the state of Texas, because Texas traditionally, constitutionally, has a weak governor system because we don't want to live in a state. Framers of our state constitution did not want to live in a state where you could concentrate all the power in a figurehead in one person, right? We have all kinds of boards for all sorts of aspects of the executive functions in the state of Texas, including this. And what's happened because Greg Abbott has been able to maintain power for so long because of the weakness of the Democratic Party in the state. Greg Abbott has been able to appoint plenty of people, so these boards are filled with loyalists and folks who are loyal to Greg Abbott. And again, this board is only supposed to make these kind of recommendations after seeing that something in the trial was done incorrectly, right? New facts, issues with the prosecution, etc. Greg Abbott was calling on the board to investigate this before he had any ability to look over the case. The case was not public. So before seeing anything that happened in the trial, they were calling it a travesty of justice and all this kind of stuff, literally prejudging the case. This gets us to our main point here, that Greg Abbott is clearly flaunting and making a mockery of our parole system. The government needs to have clear and compelling evidence that something happened in the trial that infringed on Daniel Perry's rights to a fair trial. No one in the government, clearly, in position of power in the government, is interested in stopping Greg Abbott as he does this to our parole system, as he does what he's been doing with the National Guard and the state troopers here in Texas, DPS. That the governor has just been able to amass tremendous amounts of executive power. Perry was pardoned not because of an unfair trial or anything. Perry was pardoned because of what he did. And let me say that again. Daniel Perry was not pardoned because injustice was done when a jury of his peers convicted him of murder. Daniel Perry is out on our streets and has been pardoned because of what he did. Because the Republican Party of Texas, people like Greg Abbott, people like Dan Patrick, like the fact that Daniel Perry shot and killed a protester, a Black Lives Matters protester, because it instills fear in everyday Texans. Now, a lot has come out since this trial because there was a lot of information about Daniel Perry's associations, about his internet activity, about his text messages. That was, again, not publicly available, when the verdict came about the murder trial. A lot of information has come out about Daniel Perry's associations, messages, and activity. I have a few here, Matt. I don't know if you had any that you wanted to add.
This piece from the Texas Tribune, unsealed evidence shows racist comments, threats of violence made by Daniel Perry before killing an Austin protester. I mean, just a few grabs here. On May 20th, and this is going to be some racist imagery read into the record here by yours truly. So just brace yourself for that. On May 29th, 2020, days after George Floyd's murder by a Minneapolis police officer, another thing Tucker Carlson has propagandized with lies about, interesting, prompted nationwide protest. Perry sent a text message saying, quote, "I might go to Dallas to shoot looters." 2 days later, according to it sounds like an Uber driver, just a typical Uber driver thing to be saying. 2 days later, according to the records, Perry said in a Facebook message that when he is in Dallas, quote, "No protesters go near me or my car." Quote, "Can you catch me a Negro daddy?" The other man replied. Perry replied, "That is what I am hoping." In June, Perry sent text messages from an unknown area detailing bars closing and, quote, "the blacks gathering up in a group. I think something is about to happen." quote, "I wonder if they will let me cut the ears off people who's decided to commit suicide by me." He also said, "Too bad," in a Facebook group. "Too bad we can't get paid for hunting Muslims in Europe." He said, "This guy is a Nazi. It's not a surprising at all that Tucker Carlson would be going to bat for him because he sounds like the type of person who might write for Tucker Carlson."
And just adding to dehumanization stuff that we got from him, this is somebody who admitted to have killing somebody in Afghanistan when he was in the U.S. military. Says it does not count as a kill because they, quote, are not people. So this is the kind of individual, these are the kind of views that they had. But the fact is that there's plenty of establishment here. That Daniel Perry was not some kind of guy who just happened to be in this situation. This was somebody who was actively seeking out the opportunity to instill terror and cause chaos. And he seized that opportunity when he got the chance.
I mean, it's like, have you seen Taxi Driver?
Yeah.
It's just Uber driver.
Now, we could spend the whole episode, frankly, going through the activity of this guy, other allegations too about his pursuit of young girls, on plenty of other nasty messages about killing protesters. We didn't talk about the monkey stuff that he had said, for example. But the fact of the matter is that a jury of Texans found Perry's claim of self-defense to be insufficient, and that Perry was out intentionally seeking to cause mayhem, and he succeeded. What do I always say about Greg Abbott, Matt? That he likes to operate in the gray area. He likes to subvert the Texas Constitution, for example, sending the National Guard to our border. Imply, but don't assert, don't say it out loud, that Texas is trying to nullify American law, United States law, federal law. And here, talking about standing your ground and the right to bear arms. Abbott is operating in a gray area. Because if the intention of stand your ground laws in Texas, which we do, and this is something that in his pardon, Greg Abbott noted, is that in Texas we have strong stand your ground laws. If the intention of stand your ground laws and our Second Amendment rights is to empower everyday Texans to defend themselves and their loved ones from attack, think about somebody like Garrett Foster right now, who was pushing his black wife in a wheelchair around Congress Avenue to demand justice for our brothers and sisters. And then a vehicle crashed into the crowd after we have seen vehicles used as weapons to kill people at these kind of protests in the past. What rights do we have? Do we have the right to carry? Well, apparently, to Tucker Carlson, to Dan Patrick, to Greg Abbott, we don't have the right to carry if we're with the wrong group of folks. Do we have the right to stand our ground? Apparently not. Right? It creates an extremely volatile and dangerous situation, the way that these laws have been written, the way that they've been put into practice. Because despite all the claims, this is about, an old school version of justice, right? An old school version of being able to stand up for yourself and protect yourself. This is about empowering thugs to terrorize everyday people. Because the effect of these, for example, open carry laws that we have here in the state of Texas aren't about actual gun rights or people's rights to defend themselves from abuses by the government, from threats from criminals. No, it's so that right-wing thugs can stand next to a Black Lives Matter protest, armed to the teeth, to imply violence, to threaten people, to intimidate people. And right here, what we have seen from our governor here, Greg Abbott, and from the entire Republican Party, is a very clear attempt to intimidate and to instill fear in protesters, be it by the police, like we have seen at these Palestinian human rights marches that we've seen, where the police immediately have used brutal violence against folks, including the media, right? To an example like this, where the governor of this state can say, hey, it doesn't matter how clear cut this trial is that somebody killed somebody, that somebody engaged in murder. You kill the right person in the state of Texas, you're free to go. That's a very dangerous precedent for our democracy and for everyday folks here.
And it's done for the propaganda value of it, which tells us how dark of a place we're in,
And let's also the propaganda aspect of it, one on the sense of looking tough for Fox News viewers, looking tough for Donald Trump, because maybe Donald Trump wants to give, Greg Abbott a call if he gets elected to do this or that. But also most dangerously and most worryingly, and this is where our attention should be laser focused, it is a propaganda act. It is a wink and a nod to all sorts of violent and dangerous elements in our society to say, hey, if you engage in attacking the people that we don't like, because we don't like protesters in Texas, apparently, right? That's basically what we've been hearing from Patrick and Abbott. You do something, we'll do everything that we can to protect you, no matter how egregious your activities. That is where you see the very fabric of a constitutional democracy begin to unravel before your eyes.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's like the tacit support Israel's government gives to the settlers that destroy aid convoys, for instance. Like, this is fascism, the elites in power, despite they want to resist that, and psychos on the street level. The uneasy relationship between those two, but it is a relationship.
Mm. And we'll keep watching this. I mean, there's been plenty of covered. I highly suggest people read Christopher Hook's writing in Texas Monthly, for example, on this, who's been covering this really well for a while. Austin Police Department, apparently this is news today, had drafted up a letter in support of Daniel Perry. No doubt about it. Why would they do that? Well, it's because they don't like the regularly democratically, somebody who beat the hell out of all the kind of fake challengers that the right and people like Elon Musk backed here. They don't like them. They don't like the elected officials of the Austin area, particularly because those elected officials have been investigating police misconduct and abuse of Austinites. So, yeah, it's not surprising to see those folks lined up with white nationalists and Greg Abbott.
I saw that story. It probably bears dwelling a little bit more that it was a protest against police that this guy killed somebody.
Yeah.
And the cops might not be disinterested in their maybe, even if it was shelved, recommendation that they don't charge this guy.
Yeah, so we'll keep we'll keep covering this kind of stuff. I just think that it's really important to, one, never let these threats and intimidation stop our movements, and two, to keep your eye on the damn ball when this kind of stuff has been ongoing. Because the thing is, with Abbott in particular, is this has been a slow rolling march to unravel the basic democratic rights here in the state of Texas. An incredibly frightening concentration of power in the executive branch, something that, again, is not the intention of the Texas Constitution, and complete silence and incapability by a lot of people on the left to be able to talk about this coherently too. There needs to be a lot more engagement in this kind of stuff, because this is the kind of future that we'll be left with as long as working class people are out of power in the way that they are here and the way that they are all across this country. So, folks, we're going to jump over to our conversation with Ryan Zickraff. We're going to talk about rural America, a part of the country that should definitely be a part of our fight for a different future. Part of the country, we didn't mention this in the interview, where we saw significant labor activity over the past few years. I mean, so many of these strikes, so many of these labor actions have been happening in rural America. This is exactly the part of the country where we should be seeing leftists and pro working class politics growing and thriving. And what better opportunity than right now when liberals are engaged in a nasty attack against our brothers and sisters in rural America. So we had Ryan Zickraff on to talk about the most recent example of this, which is white rural rage. So enjoy that conversation. Then Matt and I will be right back with another segment in just a little bit.